Hi, Rodrigo.
Hi, hello, how are you?
I'm good. Can you just maybe shortly introduce o- yourself?
Yes, of course. Thanks very much, Sandris. I'm Rodrigo Sigal. I'm a composer from Mexico. I work and compose in a city called Morelia, Mexico, which is like 4 hours northeast of Mexico City. I was born in Mexico City, and I also run the Mexican Center for Music and Sonic Arts, which is a public institution that works with technology, composition into music. And I run the Visiones Sonoras Festival, and I've been composing and working with different ensembles and performers for about 25 years now.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Um, what is good musical composition for you? Right?
Well, that's a complicated question, but I'm mainly interested in the process of solving problems. I like composition as a solving problem process, and since I've started working with I actually started composing coming from computers. I really was very much into technology, and of course I like music. I was very much into a lot of music from the 70s and progressive rock and stuff like that, but also technology. So it took me some time to understand that both can go to learning piano and instruments. So that's how I came into composition. And I say this because for me, composing and good music in general means something that you can listen to many times and still find like different layers of informations, things that is happening underneath what you have like on top. So for me, good music is something that it doesn't really matter the style, but something that you can listen and listen again and start finding new things where the whoever is listening is finding new things.
Yes. Um, can you just give example of the last piece, which uh, which you have heard, and could be like attributed to, to these parameters?
Well, what I've heard recently, well, I've been listening quite a lot to two things recently, which are very different. One of them is Francois Domont, French acousmatic composer that I like a lot and that I've been following for many years. A couple of new pieces together with a Brazilian, sorry, not Brazilian, Portuguese composer, João Pedro Oliveira. Both do mixed computer and instrument pieces, and Francois Domont does acousmatic music. So I've been listening to quite a lot, and together with a little bit of Coldplay, that I've been actually listening quite a lot to understand many of the ways they deal with sounds to post produce better quality sounds for my music. So I also learn a lot from other music.
And what is, to your mind, what is your musical signature, right? Or some kind of musical ideas which you usually come back, right?
Yes, that's interesting because I've been working with mixed pieces, computer and instruments for a very long time. That's although I have acousmatic pieces and I have instrumental pieces, most of my body of work are mixed pieces. I am now working on a guitar and computer piece. So let's say 80% of my music is mixed pieces for instruments and computers, sometimes with video. So going through that process of finding ways to connect both worlds, I've been coming back to ideas for like periods of time. Let's say it takes me like 5 to 10 years to actually understand something. So what I do is I usually work in five, six, seven, 10 pieces about one problem. And then
Yes.
I try to look at from different ways. For example, the pulse and rhythm is something that interests me a lot because it's something that it's very, uh, let's say, forbidden in contemporary instrumental music the idea of repetition, for example. So I've been working for maybe 10 to 12 years now in finding ways to incorporate repetition and pulse, not rhythm as the main idea of my music, but just incorporating uh, quotes of rhythm and stuff like that. And I always find myself going back to these problems of exploring acoustic instruments together with technology as one thing, as one meta instrument. That I would say that, yeah.
And second, I noticed you have composed for multimedia as well, right?
Yes,
And this, let's say,
yeah,
how's
I've been working for the very Alejandro Square.
and in this,
Go,
can
go
you
ahead.
can you identify yourself as multimedia composer as well?
Not really, because I think I'm more I'm interested in many different mediums. So when I talk about multimedia, I'm talking about more exploring different technologies and things happening in a performance at the same time. Not only video and live performance, but also space and sometimes another performatic thing, or sometimes data that comes through microphones or internet for live processing. So I'm very interested in a multimedia, in different mediums. But to be honest, I think of myself more as a traditional composer that uses all of those inputs into just finding a way of creating sound itself. So
Hmm.
although I have video, the pieces I like the most are those who I collaborated with someone for the video. The video I didn't do myself. So I'm more of a collaborator in that sense, which is also a multimedia aspect to working, but it's not working with all the mediums myself.
Yes, got it. And how much your work, let's say, impact that you are from Mexico?
Well, that's been a question for most of my life, and that's an interesting question because, as I was telling you at the beginning, my great grandparents and everyone were from Ukraine. I'm from Latvia. I'm from Poland, and they migrated to Mexico. And then my parents are from Mexico. So I have a mix of influences, and I grew up, of course, close to Mexican music, but also to European music. And then I studied in Europe, in London, and then I lived in Chile, in South America. So I'm more of a mixture of influences, and I'm not what I mean. There's nothing absolutely Mexican that you can recognize in my music, except for the fact that I'm very, and I've always been very interested in the quality of the sounds in Mexico. It's a very noisy place, but it's also a very deep and interesting country in terms of this of the identity of the sound. Not only the noise, but also the tradition and everything. So the soundscapes and stuff like that from Mexico are very attractive for me. And I have a couple of CDs just made out of Mexican soundscape projects, the rainforest and the cities and the towns and the smaller towns. So I'm very much into just trying to gather sounds from Mexico more than trying to have a Mexican sound to my music.
Got it. And can you just give example of this using sounds from Mexico? Like just giving
Yes.
one example
Well,
of.
yeah, I have many pieces working with that, but one, for example, is one for guitar and computer, where the guitar performer actually performs the piece inside the underground in Mexico. So the piece is instead of recording the piece in the studio, I recorded the piece in the metro. So he will read the score and everything, and then everything that happens when he's traveling, sounds of the machines, of course, people coming inside, people selling stuff, other musicians coming in and performing at the same time, like happens in many places. All that was arranged into the piece. And some of those sounds are very clearly Mexican. Some of them are more universals, like the subway and everything, and things like that. And then other pieces recorded in a cemetery in the Day of the Dead, for example. So when you get the performance together with the actual happening of people talking to loved ones who are dead and stuff like that. So those are things that I actually connect to being Mexican, but it's not like having Mexican rhythms or sounds inside the piece.
Yes, yes, got it, got it. And let's imagine if you would be a woman, would your music would be different, right?
Difficult to say because it's also I always thought it's impossible to put in someone else's shoes, to be honest. uh, of course it will be different because my history would be different. It's very difficult to grow up as a woman in Mexico in terms of access to opportunities and work and all the stuff that happens in many places of the world. So that would be a difference. In my particular case, I grew up with my mother mainly, who is a well-known writer and who actually did everything to support not only my music but everything at home and everything. So for me, the idea of being a woman, it's a strong one and a very powerful and with tons of opportunities. So um, but that's about it. I wouldn't be able to think how my music would be influenced or changed or different if I would be a woman.
Um, and what's your process of composing? Okay, how you start and what are the stages you're going through?
I usually, luckily for the past, let's say 10 to 15 years, I always started from a commission or a project with a performer. Um, so that helps a lot because I know what instrument I'm working with. I know there's someone there who is willing to work with me and experiment. And so I usually start by exploring the instrument, recording some ideas, then creating a version of the piece that I send to the performer. Then he or her records the piece with the instrument, the actual piece, and sends me or we work in the studio. So I have a version of the like version 1.0, as I call it, of the piece. Then I work with the computer, and then I create the soundtrack or the tape or the computer part for that, and create a new score, a version 2.0, and then I go back and forth the same process 2 or 3 or 4 times. So at the end of the day, I have a piece that it's very connected in terms of the timbre and the sound with the actual instrument because I used quite a lot of the instrument for the computer part. But then at the end, I record that I write a new score for the performer who is actually going to be somehow like the main performer or the soloist. And that's how I usually work. Even for acousmatic pieces, I work the same way because I usually work with whoever is commissioning the piece to get the sound sources that they are interested in, especially for the space and the projections of the piece when I do multi-channel pieces.
So it's a lot of the, let's say, iterative process, right? As I understand.
Yes, and during the pandemic, for example, I've done everything online, sending materials, then recording, and then sending back. But and read what I then they 12.
Okay, okay, I understand. And right, your music is very technological, right? And as you're beginning it started, technology plays a very important thing. Can you give just let's say some three the most important technological artifacts, whether hardware or software, which you are plays the most important part in your music?
Well, I would be sure that the most important part it's well, I would say two things: the microphone in terms of the creative recording that I can do to have some of the sounds that interest me. So it's not the microphone itself, but the idea of composing through when I'm recording.
Yes.
That's something that is very important for me. That includes when I'm recording outside or when I use soundscapes from nature and stuff like that. the placement and the way I work with microphones. So that's one. And the second one, of course, would be I always do everything inside my computer. So it's basically a computer as my home to compose, because besides my computer, the only thing I need is good speakers. And then I use different software every time. I use different plugins. Sometimes I program myself. Sometimes I do max patches. Sometimes I do collider patches. So I actually decide how to solve the problem each time. So it's true that I go back to the same places and I create everything on the same platform, which is a digital performer in my case. That would be the software application I use mainly. But then I work with Live, with Max, with Reason, with all the plugins that we all know. Basically, it's exactly the same applications and things that everyone is using now.
Yes, got it. And how your music changed, like in last 10 years?
The last 10 years, well, I think something changed quite a bit, maybe in the last 10 to 15 years. And it's the fact that you can actually work very fluidly and very easily with multiple sources. Let's say in 2000, when I wanted to put together uh, synthesis sounds made by synthesis or synthesis sounds, I needed of course a synthesizer and then record it, and now I can do everything together at the same time. I have concrete music sounds or soundscapes, and I can join them with the synthetic sounds very easily, and I can run different plugins at the same time, and then I can have a little bit of live coding. So something that's different with the audio. It doesn't happen with video. It's not like that yet. It's getting there, but computers are powerful enough to be able to just work with MIDI, with audio, with real-time processing, everything at the same time in a multi-channel setup. So you start losing. What changed is that you don't really think about the sources anymore. You have
Yeah.
everything available, which is good and bad, because I teach about that, and most of the students who are younger, they don't come from this world where everything was separated, and the technique to put everything together was different for each source. Now everything is the same, and you move everything around in the computer, and which is good and bad. But that's the main difference. Let's say in the past 10 years, the possibility of working in 200 audio channels with 8 outputs and a microphone and real-time processing, and then synthetic sounds. Any of the techniques for synthesis are available at the same time, and the space and everything. So it's endless now.
So we can say, right, that the development of musical technology was one of the main source of change of your musical, let's say, language.
Mm, I'm not quite sure about that, because I think the language is different from the tools you use. So those are the main tools that have changed in these 10 years that
Yes.
allow me to expand my language. And I think that's an important and a very good question, because I think that the tools, although they influence the language, it doesn't really change quite a lot, because at the end of the day, the music you do, and in my case, I end up writing everything on a score in Finale or Sibelius, and I just give a score to a performer. So I still do the same music, and I'm still interested in the same things, even though the technology goes very fast and allows me to do more things. Now I have a more complex job in like choosing what you use. At the
Yes.
beginning, whatever I had on technology went into the piece. Now a lot of my work goes into choosing what do I need for this piece from the technology world.
Can you just give example of your last piece and what kind of decisions you need to make?
Well, the piece I'm finishing now, it's a piece for a German-based guitar player who commissioned a piece for guitar, computer, and a narrator or a pre-recorded voice. So the decisions were mainly, of course, the text and the context, the conceptual idea of the piece is the main decision. The topics we're going to discuss, what's important. But then in terms of the work and the decisions, I work quite a lot in finding a couple of applications, software that allow me to work with a synthetic guitar, acoustic synthetic guitar, so I can have his recordings and some kind of a second guitar that it's performing together with the acoustic guitar, but sounds a little bit technological and generate a rhythm that becomes more a texture of a timbre. So from this rhythmic interaction, or from this or the other way around, from this texture you go into a rhythmic thing that is created by guitars that actually feel like one. So the decisions here were more like which tools will allow me to generate interesting gestures or interesting ideas with the guitar, but also with the computer guitar that they can work together nicely. So everything that was difficult to use in this way was out of the piece. That was my decision. And then I keep sending these guitarist things, and he sent the recordings back, so I can generate with the gesture of the acoustic guitar some movement with the computer guitar, let's say. That would be a recent example from the past week that I'm
Yes.
working on it now. I haven't finished the piece.
Yes, got it, got it. And now I will ask you some questions from other composers, which uh, the first question is from Simon Stevenson. Um, he asked, "What do you fear as composer the most?"
Uh, I fear two things. One that I fear for most of my life, which is that whenever the piece is performed, the technology doesn't work.
Yes. So it's
That's
always
one.
scary, right?
It's always scary, and I've been taking decisions to avoid that. So most of my pieces are very easy, very complex in technology when I compose, and then very easy when they are performed to fix that. That's one of the things. And the second one would be to the audience to actually look for something else that I'm not, that it's not what I'm interested in, because I'm very much into connecting connecting timbres and working with space. And then it happens quite a lot that people are looking for a more programmatic, a more literal, and a more obvious thing. And I'm always worried about that difference between what you are exploring and what everyone is expecting.
Yes, got it, got it. And now a question from Francois Charan. He asked, "Why you still compose, right?"
Well, nowadays it's something that allows me to just be on my own, and it's like an excuse to have time on my own and just to do whatever I want. Sometimes I compose, sometimes I'm doing something different. I read, sometimes I'm listening to music, sometimes I'm working on the computer, but all that I call composing. So it's like a way of protecting my own space, I would say.
Got it. And what do you think? How musical landscape changed in Mexico in the last 21 years, right? In this century.
Well, I've been lucky enough to see that because I went back to Mexico in 2005 after spending some time abroad, living in different places. And I started the center. So I've been seeing how the new generations, the main difference, I would say, is that when I studied in the 90s and what I've heard from the 80s and 70s, of course, it was a very Eurocentric perspective of music, like classical music, contemporary classical music after the Second World War, and a lot of influence from the US in terms of the minimalists and stuff like that. But it was this idea of the actual core of the important music, and then everyone trying to learn and do something with that. Whereas in the 20th century, young students have, first of all, they have access to technology from the beginning when they started composing, not something that
Yes.
they found middle halfway between their education. So
Yes.
they already have that as part of the core. So they think something completely different. The boundaries are not there. The aesthetic pressure is not there. And sometimes it's good and bad because sometimes they just do things which are very naive, very basic, very already what the software is doing. But on the other hand, they are very free. They don't have this pressure. They are not trying to show anyone that the music they do is worth something. So that, I believe, that's the main difference.
I just recently spoke with composers from Vietnam, as well as from Peru, and they are telling me that there is some kind of, let's say, new interest of how to combine, let's say, contemporary classic European or Western music, right, with, let's say, music and traditional local one. Is it something which is happening as well in Mexico as well?
Yes, I'm not that acquainted with Vietnam in particular, but I work quite a lot in Peru and Latin America, most of the countries in Latin America, and that's a process that's been happening all over the place. Countries like Argentina, for example, or Chile or Uruguay, that were really strong in terms of contemporary composition, and they were like the first countries having computer music in the 60s, like 80, 70 years ago or whatever. It's uh, from the 40s. I mean, they they they, they are going through this process a little bit slower in my perspective. But smaller countries, not in size, but in the amount of classical music, like Peru, Colombia, even Mexico, of course, Costa Rica and Venezuela, or Ecuador, for example, are countries that move faster because their institutions were not as big as the ones in Argentina or even Mexico, like the conservatory that works to protect the idea of European music. So other countries like Peru, they move faster. Colombia moved faster because they have a lot of interesting composers, and they are just willing to do whatever. And a lot of them are bringing like the pre-Hispanic traditions that they can grasp depending on each composer. Some of them are from European descent, some of them are from those countries. So the music that it's coming from there is very innovative and very different. It happens in Mexico as well, with younger generations working from the 2000s, where they are actually putting together a lot of technology with a lot of Mexican tradition, but within an academic umbrella, I would say. And the music is very, very interesting.
Yes, and second thing, what I was told, that there is some kind of increase, right? Increase of, let's say, professionalization of composers, meaning that there is more and more composers which get local education as well. Is it the same happening in Mexico, or?
Yes, yeah, Mexico. It's one of the, in that sense. I mean, there are very few things which are good in the past 20 something years in terms of culture in Mexico, but that's one of them. I would say there have been, at the end of the 90s and at least until 2012, a lot of investment in in arts in general, not only creating institutions and programs like professionalization of art education in general, not only music, but also support to study abroad, and then some support to come back and start working in Mexico, not staying abroad. So that's something that, I mean, can always be good, and it's not, it will not, never be like the big countries like, I don't know, European countries or Canada or whatever, but it's very good in that sense. And a lot of composers in Mexico have been abroad and then back, and there were grants and support that are slowly fading away, especially during the pandemic. But the results are there. A lot of institutions, a lot of music, a lot of professionals working and living out of that, and of course, paying taxes and generating more work.
And when I spoke with composers from Europe, for example, with Sara Nemtsov or with Dmitry Kulyansky, they stressed that one thing, let's say, one thing of this century is that there is increase of individualization, right? So that the composers are let's say, are more free from previous traditions. It's more, let's say, about their own. There's time of that they can, let's say, elaborate or develop their own styles, their own language, not following some kind of academic tradition. Is it the same thing going on in Mexico as well?
Yes, I think it is, and I just want to stress one thing. I think the shift is not within the composers. I think the shift was with the audiences. The
Okay.
audiences are now more open to all kind of music. Composers who are experts, they have an audience now, internet and everything, that it's willing to actually. I don't think it's the composers who are actually now more free. I think the audiences are first of all, it's bigger audiences because of the internet and the new communications. So you can look for the audiences you compose for, and then the audiences have access to everything, so they can choose whatever actually connects with them, and that allows composers to do whatever they want and look for the audience they need instead of the other way around.
Yes, yes, got it. So that one thing, right? What I correctly understand from you is that music consumption becomes more and more via internet, right? Since this global rise of, let's say, globalization of new music audience.
Yes, but not only the globalization through the internet, but also the local audiences, like the ones who are actually my neighbors. They are used to having access to everything, so they know what they like, and they can look for what they like instead of only having access what's produced there. So it's not only the composer having access to everyone, but even your neighbors now compare you to everything else. So that allows the composers to be more free in terms of doing whatever they want. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to do something that is completely shocking to everyone now, because with a Google search, you'll find someone doing it in the other side of the world. So
Yeah.
it's also that your neighbor now, it's a world citizen. Not only you are a world composer.
And what is, like, let's say, new music audience, right, in Mexico?
So that's a good follow-up question, because on one hand, this development of the composers in the past 20 years is it's awesome, and the young composers, but also the young audiences are slowly changing whoever looks into new music. And the first thing is that I think the idea of new music is disappearing. So the new audiences just go for the music they like. It doesn't matter if it's electronic, experimental, classical music. So those boundaries are disappearing. They just look for what they enjoy and what they feel it's working for them. And that's something that didn't happen before. Even in my generation, you, you
Yes.
you had one or the, and then because they have access to everything, they don't own CD collections, they don't own the music, they just have it available, it's around them, they don't have to pay for it, so it's something that belongs to them whenever they need it. So on one hand they have everything, and on the other hand, they sometimes they don't do the work to actually understand the value that it has for their lives. So audiences who are not artists, they just feel they can listen to 5 minutes of your music when they are driving, and they don't understand that not all music works in every space, and they don't understand when they go to a concert and they are computers, because they are expecting performers, and then if they have performers on the street, they are expecting recordings. So everything is mixed up, and which is good because it allows opportunity to innovate. But on the other hand, it's very difficult because the audiences are, on the other hand, they know they can have whatever they want. So even if you put together a very complex concert, they only give you 30 seconds or 50 seconds, like with YouTube, to see if they like it or not. They'll never wait for an hour. So after 3 minutes, they already decided if they like it or not, and they are already on their phones or they leave. Whereas 20 years ago, they would wait, and maybe they would leave in the intermission or at the end. but they will allow you the half an hour or 1 hour time to decide if the work was good. Nowadays, they give you 30 seconds, like they do with the internet. So it's very complex.
Yes, and for example, how it's changed, because this is very interesting, right? You are saying that audience are changing in the terms, of course, that they are, let's say, they have more learn about music via internet, right? It's changed their perspective, but as well as they are more demanding on the time, right? They are, let's say, not so patient like before. How it changed your, let's say, how it changed what it demands from you as a composer, right? What kind of changes you need to adjust, right?
Yeah, of course you have to adapt, because even if I say I don't care, at the end of the day, it influences me, because I'm also an audience at the same time. So when I'm listening to other people's music, I'm also losing the patience. So I'm also being part of that process, right? So as a composer, I think it puts a lot of pressure in many things. First, which is a good pressure, I tell my students, because it puts pressure on being clear, and knowing what you want to do, and control your materials, and having a clear idea and not going around. Okay, that's a good pressure. And then the bad pressure is that it's very difficult to go into deeper processes and longer processes where you need 25 minutes to finish a piece, when you have a process that takes 3 or 4 minutes, and you know that people are not going to wait, and you are also eager for things to happen, so everything develops quickly.
That's
So that's the good and bad side, and both are present when I compose, of course.
yes, I can completely agree with you because from my own experience and from what I have talked with some other music listeners, one of the most frequently, right, one of the most frequently critique nowadays is that piece is too long.
There you go. You wouldn't say that for a big classic book, right, of 1,000 pages. You
Yeah.
wouldn't say that the Bible is too long, right?
Yes, 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 yes.
So,
And I can say, to my understanding, even longer pieces doesn't work anymore, right? Like it was some 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, right? So it was 20 years ago, the piece 25 minutes is okay. Nowadays it's disaster, right?
yeah, it doesn't happen. You won't get the piece performed. You won't get the performers don't want to put the work. Then the concerts, I mean, the festivals don't want to program those pieces. So everything it goes into a Twitter-like mode for music.
Yes, yes, yes. I completely agree with you. And how you see what is the main, let's say, trajectories, how new music develops in Mexico?
Well, it comes from many years ago. It came from support from the government and institutions and all that. Nowadays, it comes from collectives and collaborations of people outside the institutions, of young people developing tools, working with multimedia or intermedia projects where they get to know each other, and start. Actually, they are more like today. I feel most of the young students are more sound artists or artists in general. They work with sound, but they don't understand it as music. So in Mexico, the development comes more from like getting rid of these boundaries and just exploring sound as a medium that they can put together with, of course, whatever they want to do, dance or video or hacking or and a lot of the things that are happening are coming from trying to generate collectives where either with social projects or with independent projects where they want to just do things and and they get rid of this idea of one composer for one piece. It's more the result of a process with 3 or 4 persons creating an artwork, and without actually discussing who is the performer, who is the composer, trying to get rid of this vertical idea, and exploring how to be more lateral. That someone of my age, uh, it's almost impossible to actually understand that way of thinking, right? You always want to be the owner of what you do, and that process is disappearing in Mexico, I think. And I've seen it in other places, of course, in Latin America and in the world, but in Mexico, it's happening quite fast, quite rapidly.
Yes, yes, very interesting. And the last question, What is your what is your thoughts? What is the role of new music in Mexico, in new Mexican society, right?
Like the role of New Mexican society. Well, it has many different things. I think it still has a lot of work to do in terms of connecting with more people. Uh, you know that in my perspective, although technology is available for a lot of people, maybe I mean, most, maybe 90% of Mexicans have access to a mobile phone. We only use those devices as consumers, just downloading whatever they give us in all that. So I think music's role is in Mexico has a chance to change a little bit of that, like to allow people to discover that two things: that there's something else going on in terms of sound that you can listen to and enjoy,
Yes.
and second, that the devices that we own, the phones, the tablets, the computers, the access to internet, are not only to consume and download things, but also creative tools to participate in generating new music or new art, even if you are not an artist. But not this idea that everyone can do art. That I'm okay with that. But the fact that new music can or computer music can allow young generations to understand that the tools they already have can be creative tools to communicate whatever they want, to record, and not only filming things on the street trying to show, I don't know, what the police did or whatever, just those videos that trying to be viral on TikTok. You can be somehow viral with sound, but that's something that we haven't been able to do yet.
Yes.
We
Very
only have
exciting.
viral videos. We don't have viral sounds yet.
Yes, yes, yes. I completely agree. It was very exciting interview and very exciting ending. Thank you very much, Rodrigo.
Thanks very much. It's been great, and thanks for all your work and everything, Sandris.